Thank you so much. We are now at the top of the hour, and we have a good group of people who are joining us. I know some will continue to trickle in as we dive in here, but there's a lot to cover, and so we want to make sure that we maximize this hour together. First of all, I'm Carrie Saratovsky. I help lead the Safety, Respect, Equity Coalition team. I want to begin with some gratitude. Gratitude to all of you for making the time to be with us today for our latest webinar in a series, which is today focused on executive responsibilities and creating a respectful, safe, and productive workplace. This webinar is part of a series that is going to focus more deeply on various elements of the SRE Coalition standards. And I want to extend my gratitude, of course, to our speakers, Jonathan Segal and Natalie Hrubos. I will intro them in just a minute or two. While many of you are already commitment adopters and part of the leadership of the coalition, we have some new names and organizations that are joining us. And so I want to, of course, extend my gratitude to all of you as well for taking this first step. And I want to ground everyone in the work of the coalition a bit so that there's an understanding both of where we've been and where we're going. Just one quick note, as you are joining, if you can go on mute, and we will have some opportunities for discussion later. If you have questions that arise as we're going through the presentation, you're welcome to either chat them to the general chat channel at the bottom of your screen, or you can chat them privately to Carly Strauss, who is actually at the Third Plateau banner right now, so you can chat them privately to her, and she and I will help facilitate conversation at the end of our time together. So first, just some framing about the coalition itself. I want to spend just a couple of minutes, and then we'll turn the rest of the time over to our speakers. So first of all, it was about a year ago, a little bit more than that, that nearly 60 diverse foundations, organizations, and experts joined together to launch the Safety, Respect, Equity Coalition. The coalition itself is really serving as a catalyst, as a convener, as a clearinghouse, bringing together diverse organizations and efforts to help drive and support change, really under a common vision and shared banner across the Jewish community. What we have found is that it's clear that the Jewish community is subject to the same kinds of issues, inequities, power dynamics that exist across other industries and communities. And, and we believe that it is our ethical responsibility as Jewish leaders to raise our voices and take meaningful action. It's not just the right thing to do, it's also crucial to ensuring that we're able to attract talent and that people are going to want to work and volunteer in the Jewish community. So, in that spirit, there are a few things that the coalition is doing. We're seeking a universal leadership commitment toward organizational change and a culture shift really across the entire Jewish communal world. Bold, ambitious, yes, but I think the organizations that are standing with us are certainly up to the task. Our theory of change really posits that while we have to improve individual organizations and the way that they operate, we also have to address the wider cultural problems around sexism and gender bias and inequity that prevent women's leadership, and really allow misconduct and discrimination to persist. So we are, to date, we're about 100 organizations that have adopted the commitment, spanning movements and geography and size and areas of focus. And all of these organizations, many of we appreciate, you're taking the first step there. We know this work is difficult. It is messy. It's going to take time and energy, both from the bottom up and the top down. And today we're thrilled to have two experts in the field who have really dedicated both their professional and much of their personal energy to these efforts. Our webinar series, as I mentioned, is an opportunity for us to dig into the various components of the coalition's standards, and we are pleased to be able to really focus in on the leadership and accountability piece with Jonathan and Natalie today. So without further ado, very quickly, Jonathan is a partner at Duane Morris. He's managing principal of the Duane Morris Institute, which provides training on employment, labor benefits, and immigration matters. Jonathan has trained federal judges on harassment and other forms of bias. He's served on the EEOC Select Task Force on Harassment. He writes and speaks extensively on gender bias and sexual harassment, and he has personally been so helpful to our efforts over the course of the last year, and so we are greatly appreciative to him. Natalie and I are just meeting, but we are also thrilled to have you, Natalie. Thank you so much. She represents and counsels management clients in all aspects of labor and employment law, has extensive litigation experience, and helps employers navigate challenges and develop proactive compliance strategies in a range of employment areas. Thank you to both of you. Again, just a quick housekeeping reminder. If you are just joining us, if you can remain on mute, if you have questions, you can either chat them to the general chat channel at the bottom of your screen, or if you would like to not identify yourself and privately chat, you can do so to Third Plateau. That is Carly behind the screen, and we will facilitate dialogue then. Jonathan, Natalie, I will yield the floor to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all that Coalition does. It's interesting when you talked about all that you do. I wish every organization understood that this is not just a legal issue. And the first thing I want to say in the introduction is, yes, for everyone on the phone, there is no, or on the webinar, there is no industry or no community where harassment or harassing behaviors don't exist and the power dynamics associated with them. So we need to acknowledge the reality. No industry, no community is immune. There's a problem to some degree everywhere, and the question is, how do we address it? And sometimes the question is the why, and I think the Coalition answers that, but I'm just going to go down real quickly and say, yeah, a lawsuit in this area can wipe you out, and even if you win, your legal fees can be substantial, so we can't ignore the law. But as you'll hear when Natalie and I talk, we're going to talk much more about going beyond the legal imperative and looking at culture. This is, as I couldn't agree more, an ethical issue. It's important because there is a legal responsibility, but also an ethical responsibility to avoid harm to individuals, to have a culture of safety, physical and emotional. We also want to make sure that our employees feel comfortable so that we retain them. And organizations get reputations so we can attract them. Having employees be comfortable is an important part of inclusion, and inclusion is critical to advancement, and that includes equity at the top. It's a mission imperative. If employees are spending time navigating what may be harassing behavior, even if not unlawful, then that organization, that individual won't be as successful as she or he could be, and nor will that organization. And then there's the reputational risk. There are a lot of times where employers win claims, including in the Jewish community, because the conduct is bad, but not bad enough to be illegal. But to me, that's not a win. The wins are the cases you don't have, because you have a culture that has a clear message that respect and civility are the norm and bad behaviors are unacceptable, so that where they occur, they're not, people don't feel inclined to go along to get along, but to shut it down. With that background, we're going to go over 8 key areas, and I'm going to ask my colleague and friend Natalie start with the first kind of core executive responsibility.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I just want to echo your comments about the importance of the work that the organization does, and say I'm really happy to be able to be here today and have this opportunity to have a conversation with you all. So thank you all for joining, to those of you who are on the line. The first executive responsibility is that leaders must engage in and model respectful and civil conduct. And that makes sense, right? Because leaders set the tone for their organization. And what that means is that, you know, when you're a leader at your organization, as I'm sure many of you on the line understand, your employees are paying especially close attention to what you say and what you do. And so it's really important for leaders to model the type of behavior that they want to see in their employees. And you'll notice that with this particular responsibility, the focus here is on positive behaviors, because being a leader in this area is not just about refraining from negative behaviors. It's not just about, don't do this, don't do that, although that obviously has its place as well, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But for purposes of this responsibility, it's equally important to model those positive behaviors, respectful and civil conduct. And sometimes that can be really straightforward, like, for example, showing empathy and understanding to an employee in a difficult situation, showing gratitude, showing that you are cooperative and helpful in a difficult situation. And sometimes it's just a matter of being nice even when you're frustrated. There's all sorts of positive behaviors, and these types of positive behaviors, those are the behaviors that are going to contribute to the type of culture that you want. One that is about civility and respect and safety for employees and free of the harassing conduct, abusive conduct, and other problematic conduct. And so it's really important for leaders to lead by example in this particular context. And so we can move to the next slide, and we will talk about something that's equally as important as those positive behaviors. It is so important to refrain from the negative behaviors, the harassing and other unacceptable conduct. And most of you on the phone probably know harassment based on a protected class is illegal. And there's a legal test for when harassment rises to the level of illegality. It involves it being, sufficiently severe or pervasive, affecting the terms and conditions of an individual's employment. And so it goes without saying, most of you probably know that, that's illegal, and that executives should refrain from engaging in illegal harassment. But you didn't need us to tell you that. And this slide is about so much more than that. It's about refraining from, as an organization and individually, refraining from a broad spectrum of unacceptable conduct, even if it's not based on a protected class, and even if it's not rising to the level of illegal harassment. And so one example of that might be, making a sexist joke. And I'll use air quotes for that. Since we have the video, you can see me, the joke, not a funny joke, but let's say somebody is joking around and makes a sexist joke. That in and of itself is not illegal. And so, that would not be considered, it wouldn't rise to the level of illegal harassment typically, but it's still not appropriate for the workplace. And so, it's really important for the organization to prohibit that broad spectrum to encompass conduct like that, even if it doesn't rise to the level of illegality. And abusive conduct is another category of inappropriate conduct that should be prohibited by policy, and obviously executives should be refraining from that type of conduct. So an example of that would be yelling at someone. It may be that you're not yelling at that person, because of their membership in a protected group, so this is not illegal harassment or conduct, but it's still a problem. And it's a problem for a number of reasons. And first and foremost, it's not consistent with that culture of respect and civility and safety that we should all be trying to cultivate. It can also create morale issues, retention issues, and have other negative impacts on employee relations issues. And even though something isn't illegal, there is still some legal risk associated with that type of conduct. So that's important to know as well, because even though someone, somebody could say, I was engaging in that abusive conduct, it had nothing to do with the person's protected class. Well, an employee could perceive that conduct as being based on their membership in a protected group, and that creates some legal risk as well. So that's something that's important to know. And the bottom line here is just that to minimize risk, to create that culture of respect and civility, it's really important to go beyond what the law requires.
Do you mind before we
of course.
slide, we said we were going to both jump in a little bit with each other. I just wanted to add 2 points to what Natalie said. One is policy language, and we all know words matter. I see policies that say sexual harassment is. And actually, sometimes what follows is not sexual harassment. And then when you take corrective action, you may have an admission, all sorts of issues. But it also sets the wrong tone because it says it may be heard as, if it's not illegal, it's not a problem. Think of the difference between sexual harassment is and the following: consistent with having a culture of safety, respect, and civility, the following behaviors are prohibited, even if not unlawful in and of themselves. So it's what we do, but also how we draft our policies and the message that we send. And so that a sexual, a racial, ethnic, religious joke in quotes or slur, any one may not be enough, but I do want to let you know, one hate term, one hate symbol may be enough. We don't want to rise to the legal level. And then on the abusive conduct, one of the things that we learned on the EOC task force, and I need to do 2 disclaimers. You have 2 lawyers, so I'm going to give you 2 for the price of 1. One is we're not giving legal advice. It's a specific factual situations. The other is, although I had the honor to be on the EOC task force, I neither speak for the EOC nor the task force. However, I agree entirely with one of our findings, which is that abusive work environments where there's yelling, screaming, cursing, demeaning conduct are fertile soil for harassing conduct of a legal nature, sexual, racial, ethnic. It sort of opens up the door for bad behavior of a legal nature. So again, it goes back to culture.
Thank you. Okay, so we go to the next slide, our 3rd executive responsibility. And this is really a corollary of the prior slide because a lot of times unacceptable conduct does not necessarily appear out of thin air. Certainly that can happen, but oftentimes it can be something that gradually progresses and turns into unacceptable conduct. And so you may have, a relationship between 2 individuals at your organization, and it could start off perfectly professional and appropriate and with appropriate boundaries, and it evolves over time, and slowly those boundaries disappear and the relationship enters into a territory that is not appropriate or is unprofessional. And that can be a problem because the conduct is still unacceptable, but it's not something that, is immediately obvious. It's something that develops slowly over time. And obviously, we would never say that you shouldn't be collegial at work or that you shouldn't develop friendships at work or mentoring relationships. Those are all very good things. And it's important to develop those professional working relationships and to have those strong lines of communication between executives and employees. Very important, certainly makes for a more pleasant working environment, and it creates a lot of opportunities for personal and professional growth. So those are all good things. Our suggestion here is to be very thoughtful about boundaries while you are developing those relationships and those lines of communication. And the reason is when there's an absence of boundaries in a work environment, it could be something like oversharing. Obviously there's a difference between sharing and oversharing about your personal experiences. Or it could be something like, asking overly personal questions. Whatever the case is, when there's an absence of boundaries, that can often lead to conversations and situations that are not appropriate for work and can make someone feel very uncomfortable. And that's particularly important to be cognizant of when you're in a position of power. So be thoughtful about boundaries, generally, and especially in a mentoring relationship, and I know Jonathan will talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation, but we can go to the next slide, and Jonathan will pick up with navigating the gray area.
Thank you, Natalie. And one of the gray areas is mentoring. It's absolutely essential. I could ask you, if you're those on the line, did you have a mentor that was helpful to you? If you say no, you may not realize, but you did. It doesn't have to be a formal process. We all, I believe, ethically have a duty, responsibility to give back. It's not only something that's good for the organization, it's enriching, but the gray can be when you go from the professional to having a personal interest sponsorship in someone's success to then a personal, what may be perceived as a personal interest in the person. And a lot of times the communication, setting some ground rules and dialogue makes it much less risky. I'm often amazed by the number of cases that we've had that never should get to us. If people had just talked about what's comfortable, how do we figure out what we talk about and what we don't? And I do need to give you one message. Text messaging, not the best way to communicate in a mentoring relationship. What people won't say, they put in an email. And now what they won't say in an email, they put in a text. Because it's even better because you don't even have to look you don't have to look or think. And sometimes it's really not intended negatively, but it's not thoughtful. So that leads to the bigger theme that with the area of sexually harassing conduct, and we're not saying sexual harassment, which can include gender bias, by the way, negative or demeaning comments about women or men, even if not of a sexual nature. It's a little bit different, I think, from race and ethnicity. At least in my view, I don't see a continuum on race in the same way. I can't ever see an example of where the kinds of things we see in court on race could have ever started out innocently. But there are areas in the gender dynamics where I can't say you should never hug someone. We want to go for civility, not sterility. And the question is, in organizations where you have a caring culture, how do you maintain civility but not suggest to people that anything you do is high-risk activity, because that only pushes people away. So I think, again, it's being thoughtful about human interaction, and that there's a difference between saying you look nice to someone you've worked with for 10 years and someone you don't know way in the hallway and saying you look attractive today. They're kind of obvious distinctions. But again, you look nice, then you look nice in that's a nice suit, then you look nice in that suit, and it gets progressively more problematic. We need to be thoughtful about whom we compliment, the circumstances, like do we know them? Not a good idea to say to someone, what's your name so I can compliment you? Do we have an existing professional relationship where contextually people have an idea on boundaries? When is it said? If it's great job, great job, great job, you look nice, that's not okay, even if it's only you look nice. How often is it said? And the same thing with the issue of hugs. Every one of us, I hope what you'll do is ask yourself the question sometimes, where do I need to be careful? For me, sometimes it's not natural when I work with someone to shake hands. It's more natural for me to give someone a hug. I'm more thoughtful about it. I recently went to a client and they said to me, what's this? You won't give a hug after 25 years? But I now know it's really clear. So we kind of want to be thoughtful about the when and the where. And my view is when it comes to the human interaction, just being a little more deliberate and less reflexive and thinking about, and our brains can process so much data in such a quick period of time that if we think about what we say to someone, if someone came into your office, I'll ask the question and you could give me your thoughts. They had long hair. And then a woman comes in and she comes in with short curly hair, having had long straight hair. Could you say, I like your nice new hairstyle? No, I wouldn't say you look a lot younger. I wouldn't say it's about time you did something with that hair. But if you said nothing, do you then run the risk of the person thinking, though you notice even the fact I've worked with you 20 years? So these are areas where we need to be thoughtful, because my opinion, saying nothing may be a risk too. So civility, not sterility. And that leads to the next slide, which is employees may come to you and you really need to be thoughtful about what you say and what you don't say. First of all, when someone makes a complaint, it's not often someone says, I want to let you know I think someone's engaged in hostile work environment behavior because of my sex that's severe or pervasive, etc. They may just say something like, well, you know, I'm not really comfortable with him, or do I have to go on that trip with her? Listen to the implicit complaints, because sometimes that's where they are. Someone who leaves the room every time someone comes in. I would go up to them and say, I notice you leave whenever Jeff comes in. Is he harassing you? But you could say, I notice you've left the room a few times. Why? So point number one is sometimes complaints are not, I wish to complain. But sometimes people do say they want to make a complaint. And what people will sometimes say in response is how they feel when they hear the complaint. Oh my goodness, that's horrible. You've now basically said that the accused did it and they may not have. Or that doesn't sound like Jeff. You've now demeaned the person coming to you. So by suggesting that you don't believe them, it's not about how you feel. It's about letting them know that you recognize it's courageous to step forward. That doesn't mean every complaint is true, but that means everyone needs to be treated respectfully when they make a complaint. So if you have top of mind, thank you for coming to me, or thank you for letting me know what's going on. We take your complaint very seriously. And then the end, you know, either we will investigate it or I'll report it to HR. You want to make sure that all the supervisors and managers know that they can't keep it confidential, that they need to report it. But we've seen so many situations where the initial words out of someone's mouth are wrong when they receive the complaint, not because it's coming from a bad place, but because they're focusing on how they feel as opposed to the person presenting to them. One of the keys is to have top of mind what to say in the moment. Thank you for letting me know. We take your allegations very seriously, and then what the next steps will be. This may be a bit of a, I don't like when people go too far on wordsmithing, but I've heard people say sometimes, thank you for sharing that with me. And sometimes thank you for sharing is heard as, yeah, thank you for sharing, a little bit sarcastic. So that expression, which is a human expression, is one I wouldn't use. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that you're telling me so that we can look into the matter and take corrective action as appropriate. I like saying look into, not investigate, because the word investigate makes people nervous. And the biggest fear is retaliation. We want to do what we can to mitigate that fear. And that leads into the next slide, because sometimes people won't make a complaint, but as a leader, you will see or hear or otherwise become aware. But let's focus on the seeing or hearing bad behavior. So you could be at a table having a meeting and walk in and hear a couple of men making a sexist comment about women, or it could be a comment about employees' sexual orientation, or it could be about race. It could be about any factor, religion. And if you do nothing in the eyes of the law as a leader, you are condoning it. I would defer to Natalie, but I know that in a lot of the litigation that I see, I'm a recovering litigator, but that I do see that sometimes people say, I knew my coworker was a jerk, but when my boss walked by and did nothing about it, that's what really peeved me off. Or when worse yet, she or he laughed. We can't be passive bystanders. And the EOC in the task force report talked about this, consistent with the Supreme Court knowledge standard, which kind of makes sense. If you know or should know about something, you got to do something. See something, say something. And what you don't do, and I really want to caution you about this, and this could be something, let's assume in your organization, you have a number of individuals who are, maybe not all, but a large percentage that are Jewish, and someone makes a comment about someone being someone who's Orthodox Jewish, and the majority are not. And it is a disparaging comment. You might say, well, we're all Jewish. It does, again, even if it's not a legal issue, it's still a cultural issue. And you look at that one Orthodox Jewish person and say, I'm sorry, she didn't mean anything by that. That kind of intervention only makes it worse, because you focus on the person as the object of the comment, and you've given the person, you sort of said, given an excuse for the person who engaged in the unacceptable conduct. So you have to think about whether you want to respond in the moment or respond later. But a real simple response is, that's not okay, we'll talk about it later. And you look at directly in the eyes of the person who's done it. You're sending a message to everyone in that room that you get it without disciplining someone publicly. If you call them out on it publicly and start saying that's unacceptable because you may offend someone, then they may say, well, who may I offend? And now you're getting into a dialogue. Doesn't matter whether someone's offended. What matters is it's unacceptable. If someone's offended, that makes it worse. But if you look at, assume there is a racial comment, the one person of color, I'm sorry, I hope didn't mean to offend you. There's another implication. If that person weren't there, then somehow it would be okay. It's not okay, even if someone isn't the target of the comment or the object of it, if the person isn't there. So this issue, slide number 6, being an active bystander, responding in the moment where possible, is one of the most critical responsibilities. The best executives I know will be really clear and find different ways of saying, can I talk to you outside for a moment? Everyone gets the message. We're not going down that road. Be thoughtful about cutting it off so that you help create the right culture and you stop before there's further harm. This is deceptively complex. I'm sure my friends at the coalition would tell you this is an area where people have done full days of training. But just know, saying nothing only contributes to it. Something as simple as not okay, we'll talk later, is a really good first step. Another good step would be the next slide.
So the next slide talks about the next step in this process, which is remedying harassing, abusive, and unacceptable conduct. It's not enough to prohibit it as a matter of policy and identify it when it happens. We actually have to take steps to remedy that type of conduct. And obviously, we're required by law, if the conduct rises to the level of illegal harassment or illegal conduct, to remedy that promptly. But it should be the same if, even if it's unacceptable conduct. So that's just some important background. Whenever we're taking steps to remedy that type of conduct, we want to make sure that we're consulting with our HR function. And the reason for that is that, you know, we want to be consistent across the organization in terms of whether we're taking corrective action and what type of remedy we're proceeding with, and what level of corrective action. And HR is in a really good position to do that because they'll have a sense of how similar situations have been treated across the organization. We also strongly recommend, when you're talking about corrective action or delivering corrective action, to focus on the unacceptable nature of the conduct rather than labeling it as illegal harassment. And that's important because, well, first we'll just kind of leave that to the courts deciding whether something is illegal. And there can be some legal concerns with doing that. You know, it could be construed as an admission on the part of the organization. There could be concerns about defamation. So we suggest that you keep the focus on whether the conduct is unacceptable or not. And then in terms of proceeding with corrective action, it needs to be prompt and proportional to the conduct in question. And it's also important that it be designed to prevent future harm, so further harassing, abusive, or other unacceptable conduct. And what that might mean is that, depending on the circumstances, it might be that a warning is not sufficient under the circumstances to prevent future harm. And so it may be that a relationship needs to be terminated. That might be something that's necessary under the circumstances, or somewhere in between. And it could be that means that a high performer or a very important person at the organization, they could end up having their employment terminated as a result of engaging in inappropriate conduct. And there's no exception to this rule. The policy should be applied regardless of whether someone's really important at the organization or a high performer. That goes a long way toward, sending that message that this is the culture that we want at the organization and there are no exceptions. So we can move to the next slide. And this is a really important component of creating this culture and ensuring that those who feel that they have been subject to harassing conduct or unacceptable conduct are not discouraged from coming forward and complaining about it or just bringing it to someone's attention. And so it's important to refrain from retaliatory conduct, of the broad spectrum of retaliatory conduct, regardless of whether it's unlawful. And that prohibition applies to anyone associated in any way with the complaint, whether it's a witness, someone participating in the investigation, or associated with the complainant. And we can move to the next slide. And this slide fleshes out for us a little bit in terms of what does retaliation look like? How can it manifest in the workplace? It could be a number of tangible employment actions, terminating somebody's employment, taking disciplinary action, but there are other ways to affect someone's material terms and conditions of employment. So it may be that the person feels like before they made the protected complaint, they were getting great assignments, and then after they made the protected complaint, not so much. Retaliation can also start to morph into a form of harassment. And so, an example of that might be giving someone the silent treatment or finding fault, nitpicking, that sort of conduct. So there's a lot of ways that retaliation can manifest itself in the workplace. And it's important when you have someone who has raised that kind of an issue or made a protected complaint, if you're going to be taking some action that could affect the terms and conditions of their employment, be cognizant of how that is perceived by the individual, how that could be perceived. That's not to say that you can't manage performance as needed, but you just want to do that in a really careful way, possibly in consultation with counsel to minimize the risk in that circumstance. So we can go to the next slide, and this is just a couple of reminders related to refraining from engaging in retaliatory conduct. The fact that the complaint lacks legal merit is not going to be a defense to unlawful retaliation. And the fact that retaliatory conduct is not severe enough to be unlawful, also not a defense to corrective action. And I'll turn it over to Jonathan to talk about rebooting the relationship.
And I'm going to wrap this up in a few minutes so we have time for the questions. But on the prior slide, take a look at your policies, because so many policies say we won't retaliate against the complainant, but they forget there's no discussion of witnesses or others involved in the investigation. And preventing retaliation isn't just policy, it's what we do. It's human nature, if someone makes a complaint, not to be happy about it if you're the object of it. And one of the critical things is to reboot it. What we often see is that people may avoid someone, and that avoidance often can be a form of retaliation. This 8E, we could spend 2 hours on rebooting the relationship, but I just want to call out to you that I think is one of the most important things. You can have a safe culture where employees will feel comfortable stepping forward if they fear retaliation. If there's almost an existential denial of someone's existence, I'll talk with you in a meeting if I have to, but I'm not going to say hello to you when I see you. That sends a message. Won't be unlawful probably, because no judge is going to say, I order you to say hello. But that sends a message, and that will inhibit future people from reporting and that causes further harm. And that leads to the last thing I want to raise, and I'm just going to raise it in the next slide very quickly, and that is, this is, for me, my biggest fear. I wrote about this for Bloomberg in 2017 at the height of Me Too, the Great Awakening with it, and recently wrote an article on it for Bloomberg. That some men are saying to themselves, and it could be women, but let's call it like it is. Some men are saying to women, saying to themselves, I don't want anyone to falsely accuse me of engaging in harassment. So the only way I'm going to do that is to avoid women. And there's a word for that. It's called discrimination. Discrimination is not a strategy for avoiding harassment claims. It's inconsistent with having an inclusive culture. So we as executives need to be thoughtful about it. And if we see it, we need to respond to it. If a man says he won't have his door closed with a woman, then the answer is you don't have to have it closed with a woman, but you can't have it closed with a man. You can't have a double standard. And I think we need, in every organization, because there are ways to do it, be thoughtful. There may be times where you need a dinner meeting. You don't want to say, well, I'm not going to ask if you're a woman, a man, because he may think it's a come-on, or same-sex, man-man, or it could be any combination. We need to think about how we ask, where we go, whom we invite, what we talk about. I hear from a lot of executive women, more in confidence, that I'm worried that now I'm being excluded. I'm not saying I want there to be bad behavior, but if I'm in the room, I can say, knock it out, knock it off. If I'm excluded, I have no opportunity. We need to think about avoiding bad behavior, and at the same time, making sure that we model good behavior of inclusion, and that's taking a real careful look at what people actually do. I'm going to give you one suggestion, then we'll open it to questions. For one organization, besides spending 2 hours with leadership on how they can engage in cross-gender inclusion, mentoring, etc., every employee is being asked, name some individuals who provided opportunities to you. And if no woman is listing a particular man's name, that's an issue. If no woman or man is listing it, then it may be an across-the-board failure. But there are a lot of little things that can be done that don't create admissions. But again, just saying don't avoid isn't going to be enough, because it is happening to the detriment of women where men have disproportionate power. And it can be to the detriment of men where women have disproportionate power if the same occurs. But I don't like diluting it. I'm seeing it more happening to women than to men. So with that, we are all open to questions. We went a few minutes over. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, Jonathan and Natalie, thank you so much. This has been a really great presentation, and we actually do have a couple of questions that have come in through the chat box already. It's actually 2 questions on sort of a very, very similar theme on sort of what to do if one employee is being made uncomfortable or feeling a little, uncomfortable with someone else's behavior, but that behavior that they're feeling uncomfortable about doesn't objectively rise to the level of harassment. For example, someone who comes to you and says like, oh, this person harassed me, they forced me to stand in a corner while they talk to me, and they're uncomfortable with that, but it may not meet the sort of objective harassing behavior standard.
Well, I think that goes back to one of the points I talked about earlier, where as a matter of policy and, from the stance of the organization, we should really be prohibiting a broader range of unacceptable conduct. And so even if it doesn't rise to the level of illegal harassment, we still have to ask the question, is this unacceptable for the workplace? And, take a look at, if it's something that the employee has expressed that they're uncomfortable with, but a manager or somebody is insisting that they do this, we need to ask ourselves, is there a legitimate purpose for this conduct, or is this, some type of ostracism? So it's a really fact-intensive analysis that would need to be done. But as a general matter and as a matter of policy, we would want to prohibit a broader range of conduct anyway. So it may be that the conduct is unacceptable in and of itself, even though it doesn't rise to that level of illegal harassment.
And if I could build on that, it's interesting, different complementary perspectives. We do different parts of this area of the law. I agree with what you said. We need to, going back to the beginning, it doesn't have to be unlawful. I always think of it as two buckets. I need categories to function in life. So I divide, when it's not unlawful, I have not unlawful but reasonable, and not unlawful but unreasonable, not objectively reasonable. So if someone says, you know, it makes me uncomfortable when someone says to me, you look nice, that's not harassment. But you kind of would be disrespectful to do it again. Thank you for telling me, I won't do it again. If you do it again, is it harassment? Probably not, but it's stupid and disrespectful. Then there would be things that would be not unlawful, but the concern expressed might be unreasonable. I don't like when my supervisor sends me emails asking me about the status of my work. The answer there might be, well, what's the status of your work? If everything becomes harassment, then nothing is harassment, and we diminish the importance of the issue. So sometimes we need to be able to say, I appreciate your raising your concerns, but this is legitimate performance management. And let's talk about why the person is sending you the memos. So the emails. So, well, I don't like email. I prefer a phone call. Sometimes I understand that, but sometimes you're going to have to take an email. So we have to be careful that we want to empower people to speak up, but not everything that makes someone uncomfortable is a wrong that we need to stop. Not everything is objectively wrong, unacceptable. If it's objectively unacceptable, even if not illegal, we should stop it. But some things we need to say, appreciate your letting us know, but you got to do your job.
So building on that, another question that has come into the chat is sort of, if you can elaborate a little bit more on how you do that so that the employee who's coming forward still feels supported, but it's also, I guess, you're not punishing somebody else for something that's not actually harassment.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual conversation, I think it makes sense to acknowledge, you know, the employee, the way the employee is feeling, and to, you know, practice active listening in that context, and get an understanding of, you know, why is the employee feeling like that, or what is the issue? So it may be asking for an example or a little bit more background, but asking open-ended questions to really make sure that you understand, you know, the situation, and making sure that you're not making an assumption about what's going on. So sometimes it can be a little bit more investigatory to really get at the issue. I think that's part of the process there. And if it's something that you've determined, and maybe you don't do it in that particular moment, like you don't have to make a decision right in that particular moment. A lot of times it might make sense to, you know, have a conversation with the person who is engaging in that conduct and understand what happened from their side of the view, or give it some thought, check the policy and the like, to you know, make sure you understand the full set of circumstances before you make a determination of that. But if at the end of the day you've decided that the manager or whoever it is hasn't done anything inappropriate, you know, then I think that's okay to communicate to the employee, but you want to do it in a compassionate way, and in a way that doesn't diminish the person's feelings. And, you know, Jonathan kind of alluded to this earlier. If it's something that makes the employee uncomfortable, maybe you're not going to acknowledge to that employee that, you know, what the manager did was unacceptable, but maybe you do talk to the manager and say, look, if it's something that's making this employee uncomfortable, then maybe we don't continue to do that, or can we approach it in a different way? Like, there could be some sort of compromise solution that might be appropriate to minimize conflict in the workplace, which is also important as well. But sometimes there's going to be, you know, situations where there isn't an easy resolution, and you just have to make the best decision and do it in a compassionate way and move forward, because people are just at odds and they don't agree on it.
Yeah, we wanted to do this where we just both sort of gave complementary perspectives. I think Natalie highlighted a really important point. There are 3 steps in this. One, listening to the person, really appreciate your letting me know I'm going to look into this. Don't make a judgment on the spot because you could be wrong or right. You have no idea. Then you talk to the person who's allegedly made the person uncomfortable or has made the person uncomfortable. And if your conclusion is that this is a performance issue, then you might go back and say, I really appreciate your coming to me, but I spoke with Diane and she explained to me that there have been 3 or 4 deadlines that you've missed, and that's why she's been following up with you to make sure. Well, that makes me uncomfortable when she follows up with me. Well, then let's talk about how you get the deadlines done, meet the deadlines. So there's no need for the follow-up, but you do need to meet the deadlines, and maybe there's a way we can talk about it. But sometimes you're going to have to, as Natalie said, say the person has done nothing wrong. Thanks for coming to me, but this is a performance management issue, and they're giving you notice of what you need to do to improve. But there are 3 parts: receiving it, which is always thanking, looking into it, softer word for investigation, and then following up. And even if there's a legitimate reason for what the manager has done, sometimes, and Natalie, I think, referenced this in her comment, sometimes it's like, well, it really makes me upset because she or he does this in front of other people. Well, you know what? People have a right, if someone's not meeting performance expectations, they should be told, but they shouldn't be told in a way where they feel demeaned. So sometimes there are areas of legitimate concern, but a better way to do it. And sometimes it's kind of finding that area of what's, through active listening, what's the real issue.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. We've got another question that's come in through the chat. How do you bring nuance to dealing with these issues when everything in our culture right now is so black and white, hero and villain?
I'll take the first shot at this one. I need to say that every time I look on Twitter, I think there's no nuance left in the world. And then I realize I need to get off Twitter. I think one of the best things to do at times is to be very candid with employees in dialogue. And again, I feel like I'm stuck in buckets no, I'm a cat lover, so I'll go into boxes. One box would say there are certain things that are black and white. Never is a sexual assault okay. You belong behind bars if it occurs. Never is asking for someone for sex okay. Never is a racial slur okay. Never is mimicking a disabled employee's walk okay. Those are black and white. But there are some things that are gray. Let's talk about things that may be gray, where nuances matter, such as a compliment, such as a hug, such as where you stand when you talk with people. And very often, such as the nonverbals. To me, if you say to people, there are some things that are black and white, and then there's some things that are gray where there are nuances, then take the elephant in the living room and just deal with it directly. I've had people, when I've done training, say, look, I think everything is potentially a problem, so I'm not going to tell any joke, I'm not going to make any compliments, I'm not going to make any hug, because I don't know when a joke could be okay, or a hug could be okay, or a compliment could be okay. If someone can't see those nuances, that's a pretty good strategy for them, as long as they don't engage in avoidance of people that are different. So I think part of it is acknowledging that where there are nuances and where there's not, and talking about them, and talking about, you know, what are the nuances with a compliment? What are the nuances with a hug? I never thought when I went to law school I'd be spending I get about 5 calls a week about safe hugging, but there are nuances that go into that. So to me, it's talking about it. And here's a really critical part: letting employees know what to say if they're not comfortable. They always have a right to make a complaint. You have to make that clear. But when you do this, it makes me uncomfortable, please stop. Feed them words that they can use as an option, not a mandate, so they in the moment can respond. When you touch my shoulder, it makes me uncomfortable, please stop. and then the person should know, thank you for telling me, I'll stop. Some of these things are just by simply giving people the code words or the expressions to use, shorthand.
Right, and I think also related to that, this is where training for managers and employee education can be really critical, because some things might seem black and white, but they're very nuanced, or vice versa. And training managers to understand the policy, what's prohibited, what is very black and white under the policy, and what some examples of inappropriate conduct could be, and how the nuances could come into play. Giving employee education on what that looks like can be helpful to give some clarity to what's prohibited under the policy. So I think that's an important component.
And I'd like to, if I can, use that question to make 2 points. One is, I know I was once in a circumstance where someone made what I thought was an anti-Semitic comment, and I was the only person, I believe, Jewish in the setting, and I wasn't wearing my I Am Jewish t-shirt, so no one knew. And I was reluctant to say something, even though I had power in that setting. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you don't have a right and a responsibility to respond. And I think all of us sometimes, if we're in the group, may be afraid of being seen as, I didn't want to be seen as oversensitive, so I was reluctant to say something. It's not being oversensitive, it's being sensitive. And we have to be careful not to worry too much about how we're seen. We have to just say it really, matter of fact, because I have seen situations, quite candidly, where women have not said things because they didn't want to be seen as oversensitive, be called hypersensitive, when they should have. And then the second thing I wanted to mention on this issue is, you as a leader, someday someone may come up to you and say, that made me uncomfortable. And you might say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. That is a human reaction. That's not the best reaction. I didn't mean to do that shifts the focus to make you uncomfortable. It's all about you. I'm fine, it's your comfort level. Thank you for telling me. I won't do it again. Or thank you for telling me, but let me explain to you why I do it. But I didn't mean to offend you is human. But what it does is it shifts the focus. Please don't do that, because if you're human, and you're going to make mistakes, and you want people to come to you and tell you. So you got to make it easy for them to do so.
Great. Thank you so much. I see that we have about 1 minute left. So if anyone on the lines wants to unmute yourself and get in one quick last question, go for it. Or if not, we can wrap a minute early. All right.
If there are no other questions, I'll take the 30 seconds and just want to thank the coalition for the fantastic work that you're doing in setting standards for organizations to look at that will make them stronger from a workplace, stronger from a communal place, help employees feel safe, help people that may worship feel safe. I think what you're doing is so important and courageous to go out there and say these are broad brush commitments that you want to make. And no one's telling you the details of how you need to do every single aspect of them. What we tried to do was talk about one discrete area, what you need to do as executives in one discrete part of it, which is bad behavior. But we really want to thank the coalition and the Third Plateau for your support of this, because what you're doing really makes a difference, and we really appreciate being a part of it.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And Jonathan, Natalie, this has been such a rich conversation for the coalition, and we so appreciate the partnership, and we'll continue to call on you. So please continue to answer.
We will, absolutely.
Terrific. Thank you all for joining us. We are going to be posting the slides and a recording of the session on our site next week. We will let you know when those are live. For those of you who have not adopted the commitment yet, we encourage you to do so on the safetyrespectequity.org website. And those of you who have adopted but have not yet taken the diagnostic, that is up and live, and we would love for you to do that so that you have a baseline understanding of where you are in this work, and we can help you along the way. So again, thank you to everyone, and in particular to Jonathan and Natalie, and we will see you all soon.